Okay, ready to dive deep into the world of Bill Gates.
Let's do it.
You guys sent in a really interesting mix of stuff on him, his Wikipedia entry, a profile from Business Over Drinks, and a diplomat piece that's, well, not exactly singing his praises, especially when it comes to his work in India.
Yeah, it's like we're getting three totally different versions of the guy.
Right. You've got tech, superstar, global philanthropist. And then this figure who's facing some pretty serious backlash.
And what's fascinating is how those narratives all kind of weave together.
Exactly.
I mean, you start with the classic American success story coding whiz kid builds a tech empire, but then you've got the other side, the aggressive business tactics, those antitrust lawsuits, and now these really specific accusations, especially about his philanthropy.
Makes you think how much power is too much, even when you're trying to do good.
Right.
Because we're not just talking about software anymore, are we?
Not at all.
We're talking global health initiatives, agricultural policies, even political influence. It's a long way from that 13-year-old kid in Seattle writing his first computer program.
Which, by the way, his Wikipedia entry goes into. And that early exposure to computers was huge.
Bella.
We're talking about the very beginnings of personal computing.
Right.
And Gates wasn't just playing around, he was mastering programming.
Wow.
He had this incredible vision, realizing the power of software before most people even knew what software was.
It's crazy to think about.
Think about it. Dropping out of Harvard at 20 to start Microsoft with Paul Allen. It's almost mythical.
It's one of those stories that makes you think, what if I took a chance like that?
Right. But the Wikipedia entry also talks about his management style back then, intense, demanding. It even uses the word ruthless. You know, it's important to acknowledge that alongside the brilliance and the vision, there was this driven, sometimes abrasive side to him.
I see.
And that intensity fueled Microsoft's incredible rise. Yeah. But it also contributed to those antitrust lawsuits in the late 90s. Yeah.
The Business Over Drinks profile put it well.
Yeah.
There's often a trade-off. Pushing boundaries can come at a cost.
For sure. And speaking of pushing boundaries, let's talk about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Okay.
It's like he went from conquering the tech world to tackling some of humanity's biggest problems.
Exactly. Poverty, disease, lack of education.
The sheer scale of this foundation is mind-boggling.
It's really staggering. It's one of the largest private charities in the world with billions of dollars at its disposal. They're tackling issues that most of us can only really grasp in the abstract.
Right.
Like take the reinvent the toilet challenge, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
Sounds kind of quirky, right?
Yeah.
But it highlights a very real problem, the lack of adequate sanitation in so many parts of the world.
Wow.
And the BMGF is trying to find solutions that actually work in those settings, not just theoretical ideas.
So it's like they're saying, okay, governments and aid organizations haven't solved this, so let's try.
Right.
And his work to eradicate polio, the Business Over Drinks piece really highlights that as a big success. It is.
It's a very tangible example of how focused philanthropy can actually make a difference on a global scale.
For sure. And it brings up this interesting question. What's the right role for philanthropy, especially when you have someone like Gates with so much wealth and influence?
Right.
Should he be able to wield that power to tackle these issues?
Yeah.
Or does it create a whole new set of problems? This is where the Diplomat article comes in, and it gets a lot more complicated.
Because that's where the narrative shifts, doesn't it? The Diplomat piece isn't celebrating his accomplishments, it's raising some serious concerns about his impact, especially in India.
Exactly. We're talking about accusations of unethical medical trials, supporting agricultural policies that are actually hurting farmers, and close ties to Prime Minister Modi, despite all the controversy surrounding him. And it's important to understand the specific allegations being made. For example, there's the controversy around those HPV vaccine trials that were funded by the BNGF back in 2010. Thousands of tribal girls in Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat were involved, and there were even fatalities during the trials, 7 to be exact.
Oh, wow.
And that caused a huge uproar, of course, even though the official investigation didn't directly link the deaths to the vaccines. It's still incredibly disturbing.
Absolutely.
And the Diplomat article goes into detail about the ethical violations that were uncovered. The parliamentary committee found that consent wasn't properly obtained from the girls and their families, and there were serious concerns about whether they were truly informed about the risks.
It's really unsettling.
It is. Imagine being a parent in a rural community, maybe with limited literacy, and being asked to sign off on something for your child without fully understanding what it means.
Right.
It's a deeply troubling situation.
It makes you wonder if the BMGF, in its desire to make a difference, might have missed some really important ethical considerations.
Yeah. And this concern about the BMGF's approach goes beyond the vaccine trials. The Diplomat article also talks about a memorandum of understanding between Microsoft India and the Ministry of Agriculture that's raised some red flags.
Remind me, how does Microsoft fit into all of this? I thought we were talking about the Gates Foundation.
Right. The lines can get a little blurry, which is part of the problem, according to the critics. This agreement could give Microsoft access to this huge database. We're talking about 50 million Indian farmers. It would include details about their land and everything. And this is where the BMGF's push for agricultural privatization in India comes in.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection, but can you explain what agricultural privatization actually means in this context? It's not a term I'm familiar with.
Sure. It basically means shifting away from more traditional farming practices toward a system that's more market-driven, often with big corporations involved. People who support it say it can increase efficiency and yields.
Oh.
But critics, like the ones highlighted in the Diplomat article, worry that it could push out small-scale farmers and make them dependent on these corporations.
So the fear is that this data sharing could give Microsoft an unfair advantage.
Exactly.
And potentially allow them to take advantage of farmers who are already struggling.
That's the argument groups like the Swadeshi Jagran Manch are making. They're really vocal critics of the BMGF. They see this as foreign corporations trying to take over India's food system, which could have devastating consequences for local communities.
And it's even more concerning given his close relationship with Prime Minister Modi, who's been pushing these reforms despite those huge farmer protests.
Absolutely. The Diplomat article directly calls out Gates for his support of Modi, even with all the criticism. It makes it seem like Gates is more interested in pushing his agenda than listening to the people he's supposed to be helping.
It almost feels like a parallel to those antitrust lawsuits Microsoft faced in the 90s. Back then, it was about dominating the software market. Now, it's about using this philanthropic power to shape markets in a way that benefits them.
Exactly. And it raises the question, has Gates really learned from those past controversies, or has he just shifted his focus to a new arena?
Right.
The Diplomat article quotes the SJM calling on the Indian government to keep these kinds of organizations at bay. It shows a real distrust of the BMGF's motives.
It's a pretty stark contrast. Bill Gates, this tech visionary, being accused of exploiting people. How do we make sense of these totally different narratives?
That's the tough part, isn't it? We've got this incredibly complex figure, brilliant, ambitious, driven to make a difference.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing the potential downsides of that ambition. Even with the best intentions, things can go wrong.
It seems like the more we dig, the more questions we find.
That's true. And to really grasp the nuances of this criticism against Gates, we need to unpack some of the specifics, especially those outlined in the Diplomat article.
Okay, so let's dive in. Where do we start?
Well, the HPV vaccine controversy is a good example.
Okay.
To give you some context, HPV, or human papillomavirus, is a really common sexually transmitted infection that can lead to a bunch of health problems.
Right, including cervical cancer.
Exactly. And the Diplomat article emphasizes these ethical concerns surrounding those BMGF-funded trials in India back in 2010.
Right.
These trials involved thousands of young girls, many from marginalized communities.
And the fact that 7 girls died during these trials, it really adds fuel to the fire, even though no direct link to the vaccine was established. It still raises those questions about safety protocols and informed consent.
It does. The parliamentary investigation that followed found some pretty disturbing things.
Like what?
Consent forms were often incomplete, and it seems like parents and participants didn't fully understand the potential risks.
Oh, wow.
Imagine being a parent, maybe in a rural community, maybe with limited literacy, and being asked to sign off on a medical procedure for your child without really knowing what it all means.
Yeah, that's a tough spot to be in.
It's a deeply troubling situation.
Makes you wonder if the BMGF, in its zeal to do good, maybe overlook some of those ethical considerations.
That's a key point. And this concern about the BMGF's approach isn't limited to the vaccine trials. The Diplomat article also mentions that memorandum of understanding between Microsoft India and the Ministry of Agriculture.
Oh, right, the one that's been raising red flags.
Exactly.
Remind me again, how does Microsoft fit into all this? I thought we were focusing on the Gates Foundation.
The lines can get a bit blurred, which is part of the problem, according to the critics. This agreement could give Microsoft access to a massive database. We're talking info on 50 million Indian farmers, details about their land holdings and everything.
Wow.
And this is where the BMGF's work in promoting agricultural privatization in India comes into play.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection, but can you explain what agricultural privatization actually means?
Sure. It basically means shifting away from more traditional farming practices and moving towards a system that's more market-driven, often with the involvement of big corporations.
Okay.
Proponents argue that it can increase efficiency and yields, but critics worry it could push out small-scale farmers and make them dependent on these corporations.
So the fear is that this data sharing agreement could give Microsoft an unfair advantage
Exactly.
and potentially allow them to exploit farmers who are already struggling.
That's the core of the argument. Groups like the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, they see this as a way for foreign corporations to essentially take control of India's food system, which could be devastating for local communities.
And it's even more concerning given Gates' close ties to Prime Minister Modi, who's been pushing for these reforms despite those massive protests from farmers.
Absolutely. The Diplomat article calls out Gates for his unwavering support of Modi, even in the face of all that criticism. It creates this perception that he's more interested in advancing a certain agenda rather than actually listening to the concerns of the people he's trying to help.
It all circles back to that question of power and influence. Is Gates using his wealth and connections to impose his vision on the world, even if it goes against what local communities need?
It's a crucial question, and it's not just about potential economic harm either. The Diplomat article also raises concerns about the BMGF's influence on India's health policies.
Okay, what are they saying about that?
They're accusing the BMGF of promoting this top-down, Western-centric approach to healthcare that might not be the best fit for India's needs. They point to the BMGF's focus on expensive medical technologies, which they argue come at the expense of investing in basic healthcare infrastructure.
So it's like they're trying to solve problems by throwing money at high-tech solutions without addressing the root causes.
Exactly. The Diplomat article argues that they're often ignoring the importance of things like community-based healthcare, traditional medicine, and the social factors that contribute to poor health in the first place, like poverty and lack of access to clean water.
So it's almost like they're trying to create a whole separate system instead of working within the existing one.
That's what the critics are saying. They see the BMGF as being out of touch, more interested in imposing their own solutions than collaborating with local communities.
It's interesting how this connects back to what we were talking about earlier, about Gates' management style at Microsoft. The same drive, the same ambition seems to be at play, even if the context is completely different.
It's a really interesting observation, and it raises the question of whether those same qualities that made him so successful in tech are actually holding him back in philanthropy. Is his belief in his own approach blinding him to the complexities of these challenges?
It's definitely something to think about. And it makes me wonder how these criticisms are being received within the BMGF. Are they acknowledging these concerns? Are they making changes?
Well, that's a question we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at how the BMGF has responded to this backlash and whether they're taking steps to address these concerns.
So we've unpacked some pretty heavy criticisms of Bill Gates and the BMGF, especially in India. It paints a very different picture than the benevolent tech genius out to save the world.
It definitely does. But to be fair, we have to acknowledge the BMGF has done some good. Even the Diplomat article admits that.
You're right. Their work on polio eradication is undeniable. Both his Wikipedia entry and the Business Over Drinks piece highlight its impact.
Millions of kids have been protected because of the BMGF's funding and advocacy. It's a huge accomplishment.
And their work developing new vaccines and improving sanitation, those have shown positive results too.
They have. It's important to remember that as we're grappling with these more controversial aspects.
Yeah, how do we reconcile the good with the bad? The successes with the shortcomings?
Exactly. It's like trying to weigh these two different scales.
Right.
On one hand, you've got undeniable achievements, lives saved, real progress. But on the other hand, there are these ethical concerns, accusations of exploitation, this sense that they're imposing solutions without truly listening.
It feels like a really tough balancing act.
It is, and I think that's a key takeaway for everyone listening.
What do you mean?
It's not about saying Bill Gates is a saint or a villain. It's about recognizing how complex the situation is, that even with the best intentions, things can go wrong.
Right.
And it's about asking those tough questions: who's really benefiting? Are they empowering these communities or creating new problems?
It almost feels like a cautionary tale about power, even when it's used with good intentions.
The Business Over Drinks article frames it as a question of legacy for Gates as he gets older. Can he reconcile the good with the bad? Will he be remembered as someone who made the world better or someone who ultimately caused harm?
Big questions.
And they're not just for Bill Gates, they're for all of us.
What do you mean?
Think about it. Billionaires and tech companies are shaping our lives more and more. What level of scrutiny should we apply to their actions? How do we hold them accountable when things go wrong? How do we make sure their philanthropy actually helps and isn't just self-serving?
It's a lot to consider. But one thing that really stood out to me was the importance of hearing from the critics, from the people who are often left out of the narrative.
Absolutely.
The diplomat piece, even with its criticisms, reminds us that there are many sides to these stories, and the people directly impacted deserve to be heard.
For sure. And that's why it's so important to look at things from different angles.
Yeah.
To seek out those alternative perspectives, to be open to changing our minds. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, but we have to remember there's always more to the story.
In the end, each of us has to decide how we view Bill Gates and what he's done. There's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think we've given you the information and the different perspectives to form your own conclusions.
And if this conversation has sparked your interest, keep exploring. Look into other philanthropic organizations, learn more about global health and development. Think about what you can do to make a difference.
Because ultimately, it's not just about Bill Gates' legacy, it's about all of our legacies. What kind of world are we leaving behind? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating conversation.